Many times when I show people things like this, they're in disbelief on the age. They're everyday items, but they're way older than anybody would imagine most of the time. So today we're going to talk about age, and I'm going to show you some items that are hundreds of years old, like these, and as well thousands of years old, and we're going to talk about value and stuff like that. Hey, it's Don. Today we're going to talk about some very old items, everyday items, items that used to be found on pretty much every person hundreds of years old as well as thousands of years ago. Now these buttons that I have here, again, we'll look at these up close in just a minute here, but these were made around 1750 to about 1770, before the American Revolutionary War, colonial era buttons. Now these right here aren't worth a fortune. The big factor is that they're old. They're obviously extremely old. They're made differently than modern day buttons, so they are scarce, if not semi-rare, depending on the variety. Now these themselves aren't worth a ton of money. These are probably worth about 75 bucks, maybe a little more each, if I sold them on, say, eBay or a button site or something like that. Now, there are rare varieties of these, and the biggest way to tell if you've got something extremely rare is the construction of it. So if let's say a button with a number on it or a letter and a number on it, which would be military regimental buttons, say from the Revolutionary War, are found, and they're constructed just like these buttons, they could be worth $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 depending on the version, the variety, and which branch of military used them. So knowing age, being able to tell the age on something is horrendously important. Now these I didn't pay that much for because the people that were selling them had no clue that they were of that vintage, that they were made well over 200 years ago. And that's the key to them. The fact that most people don't know the difference between something made 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or even 250 or more years ago, like these items here. So you've got to be able to tell the difference. Many items that are old, that could be 200, 300, 400 years old, 500 years old, or even several thousand years old, does not guarantee that they have a high value. Items from the Roman times may only be worth 10, 20, 30, 40 bucks at best, even though they're 2,000 years old. A button, for an example, these were saved. Everybody in the 1700s had buttons to button up their clothing, the majority of people, I should say. You know, so it was something that every single person in the day may have had dozens of them. They were still expensive. Something like this would have been extremely expensive back in the day when they were first made, first sold, first sewn onto a colonial era vest or a tailed coat or something along that line. Now these right here are 2,000-year-old items. They go back to the Roman era. These are Roman coins that were dug out of the ground by the tens of thousands in some years. They're extremely old, but believe it or not, the condition of these sometimes can be extremely good. Now, we purchased these sight unseen. I've got a whole bunch of Roman coins, dirty, straight from the dirt, no idea on what you're going to find for the most part. They clean up extremely well. It's something that almost anybody can do if you're into it. But the end factor is they're thousands of years old. These two right here date to around 2,000 years ago. Again, we'll look at some up close to give you an idea on what you might find out there in the real world. These are things that actually do show up. Again, the value of them isn't necessarily based on the age of the item. And many people think that something that's 2,000 years old will only be found in a museum or something along that line, and that they're priceless. They can't be replaced. Many of the Roman coins that you will still find today, there's tens of thousands of copies of them in circulation. There's so many Roman coins out there that there are books beyond belief talking about them and being able to ID them in many different variants, varieties, versions across the board. There are websites dedicated to it, just like buttons, for example. Now here's a couple of the buttons in question right here, and these are probably some of the oldest I've ever received of this type. Now I have buttons older than this, but they're just one piece. They're not multi-piece construction. They're not fancy or anything else like that. This button was made in about 1750 to about 1770, and we can easily tell by looking at the back. Now the back is made of bone, and that is actually animal intestinal lining, kind of like a early violin bow or something like that. It's sewed across it, and then the button facing, which is metal, is mounted on the top. Typical construction, any button history book will tell you that's exactly what this is. Now this one's a little more fancy, a little better constructed. This is a fancy one too. It has a brass piece or copper underneath this filigree cutout floral design you see there. And on the back, what you'll see as well is that this is made of bone, and it had the same intestinal pieces stringing it across. Usually goes from each hole and then makes an X in the back that allows you a spot to stitch these in. And that's the key to being able to date these. Again, if these had like a number like 22R or 2R or something like that, or had wording of any kind, they would be worth way, way, way more, and would probably be military or government-related buttons from the Revolutionary War, maybe even a little earlier than that. Many times buttons like this, if they are from a military uniform, would be officers' buttons as well, mostly silvered buttons. There are even buttons with floral designs on them that are military buttons. These, unfortunately, are not them, but just to give you an idea on these. Now, I only have a couple bucks into these because the person selling them had no clue what they had, age, or anything else like that. Now, here's an assortment of Roman coins, just a small batch of some from our personal assortment that we have. Some of them have extremely good details where you can instantly recognize who they are, what it says, you can read them, you can value them, and this is a pretty decent example right here. Now, again, these are 2,000 years old each, and you can obviously get them in big bags if that's really what you want. Some of them will end up turning out to be precious metal or plated like this one here. This one actually is silver plated. Sometimes we've run into silver coins that are 2,000 years old. Again, they're not worth a fortune. They might only be worth 50 to 100 bucks depending on the condition of them, but they do turn up. You even turn up gold coins from the same time. One of the coins in this batch is from Caligula, a name you should probably know. There's a movie and the whole works about it, but the condition of them is surprisingly very good sometimes, and you can easily identify the emperor, who's on it, you know, where it came from, and the whole works. Size helps dictate it as well too. But these showed up, these specific ones here, we bought dirty. They were in just a clump of dirt, and through time you can clean them, electrolysis and many different things. So believe it or not, even in great condition, they're not worth a major fortune unless you find that one in the rough, that very rare coin that's just not like the rest of them, that's scarce, that very rarely shows up. Those are the ones that you're looking for. Just because of age, that does not mean anything whatsoever in value on something like these. Even the condition doesn't mean it's going to be worth a fortune. Obviously, if it's in better condition, the value will be much greater than one that isn't in good condition. If it's complete, if it hasn't been chopped down, all those factors will be reasons why it will be worth more than just a beat-up old coin. That's just like anything. If you've got a bunch of change in your pocket right now, the majority of them are going to have wear on them, and they're not going to be worth as much as, say, a mint condition coin. They're also going to be fairly new coins that aren't, again, worth much money. Even if they're all old coins, the majority of all vintage old coins aren't worth a lot of money. 2,000 years old, 500 years old, it does not matter. The value is simply not based on the age of the items. Now, it's historical. They're scarce for the most part. There's something that most people on the globe won't see anymore these days. You're rare to run into a button or something like that from even the 1750s, let alone something from 100 BC or something along that line, a coin from the Roman Empire. But believe it or not, Roman coins are dug up constantly across Europe. Many different countries digging them up. Many times there might be a hoard where there's 10, 20,000 Roman coins. Sometimes they're found in bags and vases and pots that may have been pay for Roman soldiers. It was buried at some point and they're turned up that way. The buttons, as I was alluding to earlier, they're saved because they were still usable. They were expensive, they were fancy, they were unique, the ones that I have here. So they were saved in someone's collection for, you know, a couple hundred years, passed on great-great-grandma's sewing box, sewing basket. And many people will just assume there's not much in it, or hey, it can't be that old. They look just like modern day buttons, or they look like coins, the dirtied up penny, wheat penny or something. But you know, the age of something doesn't dictate the value. A comic book from 1939 could be worth, you know, $1 or $2, or it could be worth $100,000. It depends on what that specific comic book is. And it's like that for every single thing that's out there. So don't always assume and jump to a judgment that you've got some priceless relic that's going to be worth tens of thousands of dollars just because it's a couple hundred years old, 300-400 years old. We run into buy and sell newspapers from the colonial era, and paper in general going back to the 1400s. They're not priceless, they're not super rare. Almost anybody around there who's into historical items can afford it. A leaflet from a page from the 1500s may only be worth $5, $10, $15. Even if the book itself complete may sell for a couple $1,000s, single pages many times do not go for that much. And there's tons of destroyed books out there where you can buy a piece of paper that could be 600 years old. Again, age does not dictate value. You need to put that aside and not think of it in that way. The specific item is always what's interesting and what's valuable in that. Just like comic books, postage stamps, or anything else like that. There are postage stamps from the 1850s here in this country, the United States, that are only worth 10 or 15 bucks, and there's other ones that could be worth $1,000, $2,000, $10,000, $100,000. I never ever assume just because something's old that it's worth a lot of money. Hopefully that gives you some ideas, some thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified if I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell all your friends.
We're looking for good flavor in sugarless gum.
We're looking for a new kind of sugarless gum that's carefree. For good tasting sugarless gum that's carefree. Carefree is sugarless. Sugarless is carefree. You know about sugarless gum, too carefree.
We found good flavor in sugarless gum.
Too carefree. It's sugarless. Too carefree.
It's good.
New Carefree from Beech Nut.